tomorrow we have this big Simmel versus Keith Arkell, and of course we want to be prepared, but we can't prepare for 960 different startup positions. That's what Rauno already told us. So what I try to understand whether the principles that we are using for the openings to understand and to develop openings and to think of moves are similar also in 960 in other positions. And for that, I have looked at not only the games played at the World Championship, there were in the finals, there were 4 people meeting not online. Now I have to go out and the computer doesn't allow me to leave. Here. So there were 4 over-the-board finalists which came to the finals in Norway after online events. This was not standard time, but slow, rapid, and then for the 3rd or for the 5th game, fast, rapid, and if necessary, blitz games. There were 2 semi-final matches, Carlsen played versus Caruana, and then Saw versus Nepomniachtchi. And the winners, Saw played Carlsen, and then there was a final for the 3rd prize. So in each of those semi-finals, there were 2 matches. In the finals, there were 3 matches played. And in each of those matches, 1 new position was used. The players had each white and then black. So there were 30 different, 5 times 4, 20 different games played during that World Championship. Now, interestingly, what I mentioned already, that the players had 15 minutes preparation time where they could use computers. When they saw the positions, they could use the computers and ask the computers, well, what should be the first moves or some ideas? And apparently everyone used it and not Magnus Carlsen. Now, for me, when I learned that indeed everyone had computers, then I thought, well, maybe when we just look at openings played here in the World Championship, then I can myself look at computers because the players will have used computers. And that's what I did indeed. Now, let me go to another kind of presentation. So I looked at computers myself to find out what could, from many more than those 5 different positions, be deducted as principles. And then I was later comparing this with what I saw from the games at the World Championship. Now, in opening, in the normal standard position we know, and that's what indeed I teach to the juniors, there are 3 general principles: control the center, develop the pieces, bring your king into safety, and maybe some people add a 4th principle, connect your rooks or something. But and control your center, usually it's with pawns, and develop the pieces. Okay, very often it's first the knight and then the bishop or so. So these principles, yes, they apply very similar also 960. So I have seen a little online in the summaries, the very little literature which exists in the summary. Actually, there is a Chessable course out, which cost a few £100, I believe, 30 hours video or so by Wesley Saw. So as the world champion, you should know what to talk about. Okay, when it says control the center, then it very clearly is confirmed, yes, think of the central pawns first. Be it d4 and e4, very similar in many games. That happens also in 960 openings, but more so there c4 and f4 as well, and sometimes even b4, g4. And we will see in which situations that is a good choice and good alternative. Now, the second bullet point as a very specific item for or specific procedure to follow to control the center and to develop the pieces is that diagonals should be opened with the pawn moves, or even with the first and second pawn moves, diagonals for the bishops and the queen. More important than the developing the knights. They come out, they can jump over the pawn chain without problem, but bishops have to be developed. Also the queen. And the bishops are not everywhere always on c1 and f1. Another aspect when saying open the diagonals for bishops and queens is in the first move you can already attack pawns of the opponents, which you cannot do in normal chess because the bishop on c1 goes to h6, there is no pawn. But if there is a bishop on g1, for example, that goes directly to a7 if you push the f pawn. And indeed, there was a game, and maybe we can just have a short look at that game. It's an interesting game, which Magnus Carlsen, no, sorry, it was not Carlsen. Game number 17. So I have here Lichess. Oops. And game number 17, Nepomniachtchi versus Saw in the first round. Here we see that, well, the king is in the normal position, but no, and this bishop, but any other piece is, of course, in a different position. The queen is nearly cornered, but with the first move, which indeed, when looking at the proposal of the engine, analysis go, well, maybe, yeah, it's coming now. The proposal is with a huge distance to the next proposed move, f4. Can you actually see what I see, the also the evaluation?
Yep.
It's a little small, but if it says f4 has 65% winning chance and the next second best move is b4 with only 54%, and then it's already below 50%. So, and I come to that why f4 is interesting. First principle was, okay, control the center, and of course the f pawn still somehow controls the center or looks at the center. But also I said open diagonals for the bishops and the queen, and here it opens the diagonal for the queen, and indeed the queen looks at a7, and a7 is not defended, so it already attacks an undefended pawn in the first move. So that is a very interesting aspect. This position came in the first round or second round of the World Championship, and indeed here the later world champion Saw, he then made a mistake because he just copied the mistake, he copied the move of white and played f5, and immediately the computer valuation jumps to 90% in favor of white.
I actually did that myself.
Yeah. Okay, actually Nepomniachtchi did not take the pawn on a7, and now suddenly it was back to only 40% or 60% for white. If he would have taken, actually the valuation later would have gone down. So indeed, the queen attacks the rook. The rook cannot be defended in this position. So the knight has to go out, and of course now, after taking the rook, it is black's turn to win back the rook. So it's already quite an interesting development. It's symmetric, but of course white has the advantage of having the the move now, and still the valuation is 60% in favor or 71% in favor of white, because white can go back with the queen, black cannot copy the move, and the queen is at risk to be lost here after 5 moves already. So that is quite an interesting aspect. And now going back to the principles, when I say open diagonals for bishops and queen, usually it's not necessary to look at what the opponent does. But indeed, there may be the chance that with the first move, bishops or queen can already attack opponent's pawn. So why not making use of that? Now the third aspect, what I learned when looking at the different games, when I let even engine play against engine, is those pawns are usually pushed in the first move, which are in front of or before queen or before central rooks. Not the rooks where they are on rook's file, I mean A or H. No one would open in the normal standard position with that. But when there is a rook in the center on D1 or E1, then of course it makes sense to push that pawn, or if there is a queen in the center, like D4 and queens in the normal standard position where the queen is on D1. So we will look at a few games before I come to the World Championship, why the computer pushes certain pawns. Now, additional aspect in opening is the knights have additional squares very often, not on F3 and C3, what we know, but also on B3 and G3. When they are on H1, F1, C1, D1, then they can all go to B3 and G3. And that is very interesting. And very often, already in the first 5 moves, the knights were developed to those squares. The knights were usually developed before the bishops, similar as in normal chess, only you have to open the lines, the diagonals for the bishops, but do not necessarily have to move them. Well, and the last item, bring your king into safety. Well, castle whenever and wherever appropriate, I would say, even in move 1. Indeed, I looked at many games and there was long castling, there was short castling. It really depended. There was castling very early in the 3rd move in the World Championship or never. So like in normal games. So when I say even in move 1, indeed the first 2 positions which I randomly had looked at when I just told Lichess, please, not Lichess, Lina or this AlphaZero engine, please select randomly a 960 position and just show me what in this position your preferred moves is. And this is the result. And the result is overwhelmingly the first move should be short castling for white. 60%, because here now king and rook are already, they don't require a piece to be moved away. They are already standing on their squares where they should castle. So here, that is definitely the recommendation, first to castle. Okay, that was computer recommendation. Second best choice was either knight G3 or C4. C4, indeed, as I said, opens a diagonal for the bishop and is in front of a pawn, of a rook, of a heavy piece. Okay, this was the second position which the computer gave me. Surprise, surprise, castling in the first move, 65% versus 56% for D4. D4 I don't understand because, well, maybe that's opening the diagonal for the bishop. But castling was the first move. So even think of that, immediate castling. Okay, another position I was given. Now here, king and queen and the 2 other heavy pieces are in the left corner already. So very, very unusual, I think, very strange. The moves proposed by Lina were following or confirm what I said as the principles. Control the center, so d4, open diagonals for the bishops, e3 maybe, d4, e3, so the bishops come out, and then the pawns in front of the heavy pieces. I mean, the queen needs to go out at one time. The queen is in the corner. And so anyway, you have to open diagonals for the queen. And why is b4 even the best choice? Possibly to avoid that black fianchettos the bishop and later prevents the queen from going along the diagonal. So when b4 is pushed, then of course you prevent the fianchettoing of black's bishop, even though mostly they would go to the center, I think. Okay, I had another position here. Again, the queen is in the corner. That's why, again, b4 is one of the preferred choices. It opens for the queen the diagonal and for the bishop. Another preferred is c4 and e4, both control the center for that bishop, and d4 because it's for that bishop. And e4 is indeed not only good for the bishop, but also for the rook, the central rook. So these all make sense. And it's not a big difference whether to go for the one or the other pawn. But in fact, Lina and I had similar analysis done with Stockfish, usually go for the double pawn move in the very first move and even the second move, and then stabilizing the center and bringing out the knights. So here indeed, it's exactly those two pawns which both are in front of the heavy pieces and allowing the bishops to go out. The bishops do not have to go out immediately, but at least they have open files, so they block or they avoid also the development of black. Similar in this position, okay, the king is in normal place, but here again, e4 and b4 for the diagonals of the bishops, and e4 already is a central pawn. f3 is indeed a choice probably for the queen to go out. Okay, I'm coming close to the end now.
So would you want to be kind of thinking at the start what side you're going to castle on? Like, presumably you wouldn't want to, like in that last position, push f3 and b4 because it kind of makes both sides castling a little bit unsafe.
Yes, actually, it depends always on the situation, and you have to look at the situation here. It looks at how fast you can castle. Here you have to bring out two pieces on the king's side, and you have to do the same on the king's side, the two knights. So that's the same. Which side is safer depends on probably also black's intention. Indeed, there was a position, a very interesting position, which I can shortly show when you ask for that. Which game was that? That was game number 2.3. So these, what you see, are the games played in the World Championship then. And in this game, no. 2.3. Just have to see which one it was. Yeah, in this position, Saw in the interview said he was asked about castling in this position. It's relatively easy to castle long because you only have to move you have to move the knight and the bishop away, and then the king can go here and the rook goes to d1. But in order to castle short, you have to move 5 pieces out of the way in order to castle short. And indeed, Caruana saw in the interview said he felt very uncomfortable in this position because he didn't know where to castle, whether long, but then your king is maybe it's you castle too early, not knowing whether there would be an attack, and then it's going to the other side requires too many moves. So indeed, it is a question which really depends on the situation, but also on the development of the opponent. There is no general rule. I think in the games which I saw, there was 50% castling to one side and 50% castling to the other side. And 20%, when that makes 100%, was no castling at all, or 30%.
In my experience, and obviously playing slightly below Grandmaster level, castling can make a huge difference in 960 because you quite often, it's not intuitive where the pieces will end up for you or the opponent. So a couple of times I've seen someone castle and then they've got completely out of trouble. But the pieces didn't end in the position that I kind of intuitively thought they would. And I suppose that's lack of experience for me, and not having played enough or not seen, the understanding the rules for castling.
Yeah, you're confirming that you better wait with castling until you know how your opponent sets up the attacks or the pawn pushes and the pieces. And very often there are openings where you have the choice to castle short and long, and you also wait in these openings. I know it from London System, for example, whether to castle short or long, just waiting what the opponent does. And I think the reason why short castling is more common in normal chess is maybe because there are less pieces to move out of the way. The queen can stay at your castle. Yeah. Okay, we are coming to close to the last example. Similar here, that starting position, d4, c4, b4, they all open up diagonals for the queen or the bishop. So these would be the first thoughts, at least, when it comes to the first move. Similar here, b4. That's interesting. The computer doesn't consider g4. g4 opens up also the diagonal for this bishop on h1, but it considers b4 because there it is a pawn in front of a heavy piece. That's why I thought there must be something with the heavy pieces. When they are, especially when they are in the center, they are already supporting the pawn push. They're supporting the pawn. They cannot be easily attacked.
Would you ever develop those knights to, in that last example, you said B3 and G3 are popular squares. Would you ever consider bringing them over to like D3 or something? That seems a weird place to put a knight.
I saw this in the early moves, relatively rare, I have to say. Maybe because indeed you don't like to have your pieces behind or the knight behind your central pawns, but more the central pawns moving towards squares on f5 or e5 or so. So they might indeed hinder that. I have seen this relatively rare. I have sometimes seen moves like the knight from f1 to d2. So it means in the notation it says knight f d2, very strange notation. F1, D2, and then even going to B3. So it's much more common to see that a knight going to G3. If there is a knight on F1, so most probably you see the knight developing to B3 and not to D3. Like here, knight D3 is it's the fifth. It would be the next move in the proposal. And there is no knight F3 I see, Knight h3 I see, but not knight d3. Doesn't there is actually knight d3. Okay, I have to correct myself.
Seems a bit weird before you've pushed that d pawn though to be putting that knight on d3.
Yeah. Okay, here again, central pawn and in front of bishops and heavy pieces. And this is now something where the computer said any pawn move on the king side, h4 even, because the queen has to at one time come out, g4, allowing not only the king, the rook to come out, but also the queen and the bishop, f4, and indeed here the central pawn e4 is not going to e4 but to e3. But I think there's not a big difference between 55 and 50%. I think that's not a big problem. e4 probably is not so good because it restricts the queen diagonal. And indeed the queen already looks at b7.